the jury is not in the courtroom right now. I wanted to follow up on a couple of exhibits that were admitted through Mr. Orman, or by Mr. Orman. Exhibit number 2504, I think, was included within the pictures that you admitted through Special Agent Rigopoulos, and we don't have that photograph, Mr. Orman. We don't have 2504. And then I think in regard to a group of photographs that you admitted, actually, hold on. Let me talk to Ms. Gerlings real quick. Ms. Gerlings, can you come up here real quick? All right, one more thing. When you admitted exhibits 2315 through 2509, you said except 2335, 2336, and 2446. I think you may have meant to say except 2355, 2356, and 2446, because those are the ones that are missing.
My paralegal alerted me to that, Your Honor. I apologize. That is what I meant to say. I'm looking at the 2304 thing.
All right. So the record now is clear then. P-TR-2315 through 2509 were admitted, with the exception of 2355, 2356, and 2446. And then we don't have 2504. So if you would look into that, please. All right. Let's bring the jury in, please. The record should reflect the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, everyone. Please be seated. Mr. Edson, call your next witness, please.
People call Robert Higginbotham.
Good afternoon, sir. Could I have you raise your right hand, please, so that I can administer an oath? You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names and middle name if you have one.
Robert Lee Higginbotham, ROBERTLEeHigginbotham.
Mr. Edson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Sir, if you could just speak into the microphone a little bit. You can move it around and get it close to you as need be. What do you do for a living?
I'm the general manager of a company called Approved Gas Masks in Maryland.
What is Approved Gas Masks?
Approved Gas Masks is a company that provides protection equipment for law enforcement, hazmat crews, first responders, healthcare providers, and civilians.
So if I have in some of my notes before me here, advanced gas masks, is that incorrect?
That's incorrect.
Okay, so your company is Approved Gas Masks.
Correct.
Are you also familiar with NBC gas mask?
Yes, that's one of our websites.
Okay. What is your official title?
General manager.
How long have you been with Approved Gas Mask?
19 years.
From the name of your company, I'm guessing you are a retailer of gas masks. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Any other type of products that you generally have?
Gas masks, chemical suits, filters, chemical boots, gloves, just general protection equipment.
Do you have an online retail presence?
Yes, we have a number of sites.
Can any general member of the public order items from your website?
Yes, sir.
Does that include certain types of gas masks?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the record-keeping systems with Approved gas masks?
Yes, sir.
Are you a records custodian for Approved gas masks?
I'm not sure what that means.
Do you keep the records? And
Yes.
Are you familiar with the records?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And when I'm talking about records, I'm referring to records related to customer purchases, invoices, sales, things of that sort. Are you familiar with all those type of records?
Sir.
How in general does Approved Gas Masks maintain the records informations related to transactions with their customers?
When an order is placed mostly online, if an order is placed online, the order is printed out through our shopping cart system, which is just our bookkeeping system. The orders are printed out, the orders are processed, packaged, shipped, and tracking numbers entered into the system, and that's pretty much it.
Are those records kept in some sort of computerized system?
Computerized and paper copy.
And if you're ever requested, are you able to have access to some of those records
Yes, sir.
related to particular customers?
Yes, sir.
I want to draw your attention to July of 2012. In the days after July 20th, 2012, were you ever contacted by law enforcement related to a potential purchase by a James Holmes
Yes.
from your company?
Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to wait till he's finished with his question. Even if you can anticipate the question, please wait until he's done. Otherwise, my court reporter can't take both of you down, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Could that have been as late as September of 2012?
Yes.
Okay. Did you provide records and documents related to a purchase by James Holmes of a gas mask? Did
Yes.
you provide that to law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Sir, I've handed you what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 1001. That is a two-page document. It's a back-to-back document. Can I have you take a look at both of those pages, please? Do you recognize that document?
Yes, sir.
I should say both of those documents.
Yes, sir.
What are those documents?
The front copy of this is the actual invoice that would have been printed out with my handwriting on it, with the notes marking that the transaction had been approved, manually run through the credit card processing system. And that's our in-house copy that we keep with the tracking number across the bottom. And this copy on the back is the copy that would have been entered with this package that would have been delivered to the customer.
Both of those documents, are they kept in the normal and regular course of business through your company?
Yes, sir.
The record and data compilation as far as these records goes and how your company compiles them, are they accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Are you yourself familiar with these records?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, are these the actual records you provided to law enforcement in response to their inquiry?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I would move for admission of People's Exhibit 1001 at this time.
Ms. Brady?
No objection.
All right, without objection, P-TR-1001 is admitted.
Move to publish, Your Honor, if I could, please.
The request is granted.
If I could publish the first page of People's Exhibit 1001. Sir, over your shoulder there's a very large screen. You may have it in front of you as well, but for purposes of the jury here, a couple of things. It's up on the large screen there. I've also got a rather large stick right there if you need that for your testimony. If you do, we have a handheld mic if you feel like you need to point anything out in specifics, okay?
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do is, you don't have to go through all of this document, but I do want to have you point out for the jury, first of all, who is the customer related to this invoice?
The customer on this invoice is James Holmes.
And was there an email associated with that customer?
Yes, it's dsherlockb@hotmail.com.
Is there an address associated with this?
1690 Paris Street, number 10, in Aurora, Colorado, 80010.
Is there an IP internet address?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, 67.16, I don't have my reading glasses, sorry. 67.166,
6 maybe?
I guess, .24.237.
Okay. We could scroll down just a bit there. You testified to this, but there appears to be something circled there and what looks like maybe an OK and some numbers. Do you know those writing?
Yes, that's in the system does not process the cards when the order is placed online. We manually process the cards, so that's my handwriting saying the transaction was okay with the approval code that was provided, and the offline is crossed out to make sure it's not run again.
What was the payment method?
Payment method was through a MasterCard.
The last 4 digits of the credit card for that MasterCard, can you see what they are?
2217.
Okay. Again, the shipping address is to that same Paris Street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We could scroll down just a bit more, please. What exactly did Mr. Holmes order?
He ordered a SGE 150 mask kit, which is an SGE 150 mask with an NBC filter.
Describe what that is.
It's a standard issue gas mask, single port in the middle, and with a standard NATO, what they call a NATO NBC filter, which is an all-encompassing filter.
How was that item shipped to the defendant?
Via FedEx.
What was the grand total once shipping was taken into consideration?
$133.74.
If we could go to the second page, please. You said this is the document that would have been included in the shipment?
Yes, it's like a packing slip.
When was the order date?
The order date was May 10th, 2012.
Fair to say that was before June 7th of 2012.
Yes, sir.
If I could just scroll down the second page here briefly. Anything additional on the second page of the document that is of importance that you've not already testified to the first page?
It has the tracking number on his page with the actual ship date, and it just shows being shipped by FedEx. It looks like there's a mistake in the corner saying it was UPS, but it was not shipped UPS, it was shipped FedEx.
To the best of your knowledge and your review of the records, it appeared that this order was fulfilled.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with that particular type of gas mask?
Yes, sir.
If I could please have People's Exhibit 2132. It's a photo already admitted into evidence. Sir, can you take a look at that photo for me? Do you recognize what's in People's Exhibit 2132?
It appears to be an SGE 150 with some slight, maybe a modification of some sort on the front of the mask.
Okay, and again, if you feel like you need to point things out for the jury, let me know and we can accommodate that, but what do you mean, what are the accommodations you're talking about?
Well, what I'm referring to is the plastic piece that runs here. Not standard on that type of mask.
I'm sorry, sir, you have to use the microphone. There's a handheld there.
Has it got it on?
You need to turn it on, yeah.
This piece here seems to be a modification. I can't tell if it's just the image, but usually this is all clear plastic on the very front of the mask. So I'm not familiar with what this is or this device here. That's not something that was from our company.
Okay. Describe, if you would please, more about the modification to the vision area of the mask. How does that generally look before modification?
Before modification, this whole face shield is completely clear, all the way down to the framing part here for the port for the filter to go in. So this part here, I'm not sure what material that is, but that's not standard for the mask.
Okay. Aside from that modification and the other, what appears to be an earbud at the bottom, does that appear to be the same mask that we were describing in the
Yes, sir.
People's Exhibit 1001?
Yes, sir.
All right. You can go ahead and have a seat if you would, please. Judge, may I approach the court reporter to retrieve an exhibit, please?
Yes.
Sir, I've handed before you what's already been admitted as People's Exhibit 669. It's wrapped heavily in plastic, but to the best that you can you take a look at People's Exhibit 669 and tell me if you recognize it?
Yes, this is an SGE 150 with a few modifications done. It looks to have been painted black in certain areas, and I can't tell if that's tape. But other than this modification here, and this is the standard gas mask filter that comes with the mask, but this is an SGE 150.
The same item that was ordered by...
Same item that was ordered, yes, sir.
But can I have one moment, please? Sir, just a couple more questions if I could. You described an NBC filter, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What does NBC stand for?
Nuclear biological chemical.
You still have before you People's Exhibit 669.
Yes.
The modifications you're referring to, first of all, how, if at all, would that modification affect vision out of the mask?
It might affect...
Judge, I'd object to speculation. Lack of foundation.
Sustained. You can ask a different question.
Okay. The modification, is it at or around the vision area of the mask?
No.
Okay. You also described that it appeared to have been painted black. What was the original color before that modification?
This face shield is clear all the way through. It's clear plastic.
No, nothing further, Judge. Thank you.
Ms. Brady, do you have any cross-examination?
I don't, thank you.
All right. And the jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness. So may this witness be released from his subpoena, Mr. Edson?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection, Ms. Brady?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Brockler, you're up.
Your Honor, people call Kurt Freed.
Good afternoon. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath? You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, please be seated. You can hand me that cup there that someone left behind. I'll get it out of your way. And actually this one too. Thank you. All right. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first, middle name if you have one, and last name for the record?
Yes, my name is Kurt Richard Freed, C-U-R-T, Richard, R-A-C-H-A-R-D, Freed, F-R-E-E-D.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, would you tell us what you do for a living, please?
Yes, I'm a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine.
How long have you been doing that?
40 years.
In a row?
I'm afraid so.
Are you part of the neurosciences program in some way?
Yes.
In what way?
I'm a member of the neuroscience program. I was actually director of the program for 5 years, back 1997 to 2002. It's a rotating kind of responsibility.
Now, I think I've asked everybody this question so far, but tell us the path that you took to get from wherever you started to get to neurosciences here in CU.
You mean
How did you
started in college?
Yeah, well, we don't have to go back to sixth grade or anything, but you
Okay.
said you were a medical doctor. Tell us about
Right.
everything forward.
Well, I went to Harvard College and Harvard Medical School in Boston. And then ordinarily you get clinical training after medical school. So then I went to UCLA, Harvard General UCLA for internal medicine residency. Then I went back to Boston and I did a year of psychiatry residency. And then I went to San Francisco and did 3 years of research training at the University of California, San Francisco. And then I moved to my present job, which I have had since.
Okay, and in part of your role in the neurosciences program and as a medical doctor as well, do you have a laboratory that takes on graduate level students?
Yes, so since I joined the faculty at the University of Colorado, I have had my own research laboratory, and that involves writing grants, hiring staff, getting students involved in research, and then doing the research and publishing articles.
And do you typically bring on board first-year PhD candidate type students?
Yes.
How many of those do you think that you've had over the course of your time doing this?
Well, people come and do short research rotations, namely a 3-month research rotation, several times a year. So there have been perhaps 100 of those individuals over my career. 3 graduate students have gotten their PhDs or MD PhDs in my lab over the years. And then another training period as a postdoctoral fellow where you finish your PhD and then come into my lab to do additional research for 2 or 3 years, and I've had more than 30 of those individuals.
Back in 2012, for what we know to be the 3rd rotation, would you have had the defendant here in the blue shirt and the stripes in your lab in the capacity you just described?
Yes.
And so what months would he have been in your lab?
Well, he started, I believe, February 27th, and then was in a rotation until May 17th.
Now we'll get to the lab and what it does and how he performed, but did you have contact with, meet the defendant prior to that February 27th lab start date?
Yes. Well, typically a student will contact me to express their interest in the area of research that we do, and then have a meeting, and then just see the specific area that a project might be developed just for that individual.
What was the
And so that was earlier in February that he contacted me.
Forgive me for stepping on your words, Doctor. The big project that the lab was working on before the defendant started with you, what was that?
Well, we have several different projects going on at any given time. So my lab is known for putting new brain cells into Parkinson patients to treat their Parkinson's disease. We were the first to do that in the United States back in 1988. We're now making stem cells and making brain cells from stem cells ultimately to treat people. We're also working on a drug that may stop Parkinson's disease and literally stop the disease from ever getting worse. So these are project areas, but under those are several different specific projects that could be, done in 3 months or 1 year, depending on the student or postdoc schedule.
Do you remember which sub-project that you had put the defendant on back in February through May of 2012?
Yes, it was a project involving something called microRNAs. And microRNAs are molecules that we're just beginning to understand how much and how important they are at controlling cell function. So this was a new area for us, but an offshoot of our interest in making new brain cells.
Now, describe for us, if you would, after your first encounter with the defendant and his entry into your lab, describe his demeanor, his sort of affect and presentation, if you would.
Well, I would say that he was a somewhat shy person, but one that was easy to have a conversation with, and he was thoughtful and could go into depth on subjects.
Polite,
Very polite,
professional.
yes.
Now, how much contact would you have with him in your lab?
Well, the students that are on rotations are taking a major load of lectures. They're taking courses that occupy the first half of every day, pretty much. And so typically students would come to the lab between 10 and noon and then spend, basically half a day doing research.
In this case, did you ever have any concerns or questions about the defendant's schedule in terms of being at the lab and working at the lab?
No, he was diligent, I would say.
Tell us what concerns you did develop over time with the defendant in your lab.
Well, again, part of the lab rotation process is to, get your teeth into a project and accomplish experiments and have results to show and to, make steady progress in it. And because this project was a fairly new one for the lab, he had to learn several new techniques. Although the stem cells that he was working with are those that the lab had had several years of experience with. So oftentimes students will have, it will be challenging for students to learn new techniques and then to not only master those techniques, but to get new research results. And so that was the issue. It was hard for him to get the cultures to work.
Now, these are techniques, by the way, that he's taught before he's thrown into actually doing it?
You're taught as you do it. Okay. Namely, there's a rule in medical school: see one, do one, teach one. So you.
Okay. Before we get to the rest of that progress on the data and the performance part, let me ask you: was there a component of this, at least early on, that involved you assigning to him research on background in terms of what you were studying?
Yes, well, in order to accomplish a project, it isn't just a question of using your hands. You also have to understand what the project is. And so he went to the library, did his own research on articles, and was able to, in our one-on-one meeting, to give a good account of the background of this field.
Now, this was at your request that he go and do this research?
Well, this is standard for every student.
Did he end up having to present that information to a larger group, larger than just the one-on-one session?
Yeah, so my lab group, which is varies between 5 and 10 people, depending on students rotating, meets once a week for an hour, in which every individual has a chance to present whatever the last week brought or the last couple of weeks. And so that is a slide presentation, a PowerPoint presentation.
How did he do with that?
Well, the first couple that he did, I would say that he didn't make it as clear as he could have, as logical, and yet that is very often the case, and that is my job, is to teach people how to organize and present results.
Other than those in-group presentations, when you get back to the performance piece, in fact, let me start over. The only thing I didn't do was to talk really fast, sorry. I'm going to start over with a new question, one that hopefully makes sense. The coursework portion of this, how would you describe the defendant's performance on coursework, book-type research part of this lab?
My understanding is that he got excellent grades in his coursework.
In your lab, when you had him do coursework or the research stuff, how would you
Well,
rate him?
he did fine, which is what I would expect.
In terms of getting results for the experiments that he was assigned to do, how did he do?
He did fair, I would say.
Describe that for us.
Well, again, you would like a project to be accomplished. You set out something that seems reasonable to finish in 3 months, and then the issue is how far along do you get on accomplishing a project. And he got partway along, I would say.
How part?
third of the way, but again, it tends to be somewhat all or none, namely either you accomplish the goal or, the steps along the way are limited. Learn to do tissue culture techniques and, learn several methods.
Now, did you end up having to assign that particular project to another student kind of right after the defendant?
Yes, I signed that to another student who spent 3 months in the lab the summer after, starting in late May and continuing till August, and that student finished that project.
They were able to complete it.
That's right.
Now, since the project itself is the basis for this final talk rotation presentation, talk to us about what you went through with the defendant to get him there.
Well, the first thing that we do in preparing a student to give a 10 or 15-minute talk is to say, this is not an hour. This is a very discrete thing. It starts with an introduction and title, and it ends with thank you very much. And so first the students will generate that talk on their own, and then I go over that, and then we start modifying it. And so the period of review and modification was probably 6 hours total, an hour at a time on 6 different occasions leading up to the final presentation.
And was there still very little data that the defendant was able to use in that final presentation?
Well, we used the data that he had generated, and it did not include the, the final story, essentially. But many other students that don't finish the project completely, he still made a thoughtful presentation and one that was easy to follow and that other people said was good.
How would you describe that final presentation then for the defendant?
I think he did an excellent job. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you ever have conversations with the defendant about him continuing on in your lab for the purposes of obtaining that PhD?
Well, this is the purpose of rotations is to decide whether there's a fit between an individual student and a faculty member and a lab research area. And that was discussed, during the rotation, and then the day after the rotation ended, I believe on May 18th. And then we had a final meeting on May 30th. And because his accomplishments in the lab had not been all that great, I had some hesitation about having him do a thesis in my lab, and basically said, let's see how you do on the preliminary exam, which was going to happen in June, before making any commitments.
Did you have any other concerns about him interacting in the lab, like being a permanent member of the lab for the next 5 years with your, I don't know what you call it, your staff?
Well, part of this fit is to say, oh, okay, how is this individual's personality and style and these other people? You are always trying to maintain an atmosphere, a productive atmosphere in which people are going to be, close and supportive working associates.
And did you express some of those concerns with the defendant as well in talking about him joining your lab?
Very little. Most everything is about performance and, is this going to be a good fit going forward?
Did he ever circle back with you after your May 30th conversation with him?
I don't recall.
Had you ever promised him a spot in your lab?
No.
Had you, at least I guess, led him to believe that depending upon his performance with the prelims, the door may be ajar, so to speak?
I did leave the door open a crack, yeah. Mm-hmm.
With the express concerns that you've described here?
Right. Mm-hmm.
A couple final questions. One is, over the course of your time exposed with the defendant and speaking with him, did you ever think that he was detached from reality?
No.
From the time that you first met with him, when he asked about joining your lab until that May 30th meeting, did you detect any big changes in the defendant?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ms. Brady, cross-examination?
afternoon.
Hello.
I just have a few follow-up questions. Now, Mr. James Holmes, he was in your lab, and that was the third of 3 labs for him. Is that your understanding?
Correct.
What I want to do is I want to put up a chart on the screen here and have you take a look at it, and we'll sort of put into perspective, that's Defense Exhibit 8, please. We'll put into perspective for the jury where your lab fell. Do you see those 3 big white boxes at the top?
Yes. Oh, I see.
The one that says Kurt Fried, I assume does that accurately represent where your lab fell in his string of 3?
That's correct.
And if we can pull that out, please. And it has a name, Jessica Comiskey. Who is that?
Jessica is a woman who was doing her PhD in the lab, had spent several years in the lab, and was, basically got to know James Holmes quite well.
So she was there for longer than just a rotation.
She was there 5 years.
Okay. And then same question for Young Mook Lee.
So Young Mook Lee is a postdoctoral fellow, and he also spent several years in the lab.
And did he also work with Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
And then it has the dates February to May of 2012. Does that represent the length of your lab for Mr. Holmes?
Right. The end of February, the 27th, as I recall, and then as you show, May 17th, finished.
For his presentation.
Right.
Great, thank you. We can take that down. The presentation that occurred on May 17th, just to be clear, that's sort of a wrap-up for the whole lab. Is that
For the 3 months, yes.
okay? In addition to the May 17th sort of wrap-up presentation, you described shorter sort of talks or presentations to a smaller group. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, good. And for the May 17th presentation, was that what you said you worked with Mr. Holmes on for about 5 or 6 hours getting ready for?
Correct.
And so that presentation was done in conjunction with working with you and working with perhaps Ms. Comiskey?
Well, the particular presentation, I'm usually the person involved in making suggestions, and then other people may listen in on the near final version to see what they think.
And so as Mr. Holmes was preparing for that, you would make suggestions, and did he appear to implement the suggestions that you made?
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh. And at the end of all of that, you felt like he did a good job at his presentation?
That's correct.
Now, you've also described Mr. Holmes as shy.
Yes.
Did you find him to be somewhat timid?
Well, no, I don't think timid would be a right word.
Soft-spoken?
Soft-spoken.
Okay. Introverted?
Well, again, he could be as conversational as the situation was appropriate for.
Did you find that you had to sort of initiate the conversation with him, though, to get a conversation going?
Well, see, as the professor, you're used to initiating conversations.
And so that's what you did with Mr. Holmes?
Well, I can't characterize it that way. See, he would be sitting at a desk in the laboratory, and I would come in and say, "Hello, how are you doing?"
Okay. And then just start the conversation
Right.
with him? Okay. The lab procedures that Mr. Holmes was having to do, I think you said it certainly involved some hands-on activity, correct?
Correct.
And that was the part of the lab, which you thought he maybe performed a third of what he should have?
Well, I said that the project to be finished was 3/3. And then he did learn some important techniques that would make it possible to finish that project.
Okay, and
So,
you,
but it's not, it isn't like they're, these are not blocks being stacked. It's learning a set of techniques, having experiments work.
but as far as progress, he didn't make the kind of progress you had hoped for.
I had hoped for more progress, yes.
And in the lab, it sounds like the lab work requires a certain amount of interaction with the other people in the lab.
That's correct.
And as far as his book work or his writing or research, that he seemed to do exceptionally well at.
He did well, yes.
Did he ever present to you to act sort of arrogant or be a know-it-all?
No.
Did you have any concern about the amount of energy he seemed to have towards the lab?
Well, that's hard to characterize. Namely, he could be goal-directed and, again, looking up a series of articles, analyzing what was going on with them. He understood the purpose of the lab methods, all that sort of thing, so.
But it was the actual hands-on work in the lab that you seem to have some concern about.
Well, he could have accomplished more.
The only interaction you had with him was actually in the lab. You never had interactions with him outside of school?
No.
Can I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you, Professor.
Mr. Brockler, do you have any redirect?
I do not, Your Honor.
All right. The jury may have some questions for you, sir, so I'll ask you to please wait. Thank you. Would counsel please approach? Sir, the jury has submitted a question for you, and I have found, based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, that the question is appropriate. The question is, what was his demeanor on or around May 17th, the day of the presentation?
Well, he was very prepared to give his seminar, and I felt like he gave it confidently. It was in the morning, and he was, I think, the fifth of six presenters, so if you were sitting there waiting to perform, I would imagine that you could get nervous during that time, but he basically did a good job with the performance.
Any follow-up questions, Mr. Brockler?
No, Your Honor.
Any follow-up questions, Ms. Brady? No, sir. All right. May this witness be released from his subpoena, Mr. Brockler?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Call your next witness, please.
You know the people called Jessica Comiskey?
I have you raise your right hand for me, please? If I can administer an oath, do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, please be seated. You can hand me that cup there. Thank you. We'll add a trash can here at some point. All right, could you please, tell us your full name and spell your first and last names, and spell your middle name if you have one as well.
Jessica Elizabeth Comiskey. It's Jessica Elizabeth Comiskey. It's Cummiskey.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, would you please tell us what you do for a living?
I'm currently in a postdoc position doing scientific research up at CU Boulder.
In what area?
MCDB, it's molecular cellular developmental biology.
And you say postdoc. Does that mean that you've earned your PhD?
I have.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Am I supposed to call you doctor?
Yes.
I'm going to do it then. I'm going to do it. Doctor, before you were a doctor, pre-doctor, were you in Kurt Fried's lab, and that's a real doctor, Dr. Kurt Fried's lab, sorry, in 2012 and before?
Yes.
Tell us about when you started there and what you did for him.
I started grad school in 2008. I chose Kurt Fried as my dissertation mentor. So starting in 2009, through when I finished, I was working in Kurt Fried's lab. I was studying Parkinson's disease, working towards my dissertation.
Now, had you gone through the entire graduate program through the University of Colorado there at Anschutz?
Yes.
Did you have to go through that rotational thing that everyone does to find the right lab to hook up with?
Yes.
And you did that back in 08, 09?
Yes.
Okay. Were you in Dr. Fried's lab during the period of time that the defendant here in the blue shirt with the white stripes was also in the lab?
Yes.
Now, the first time you saw the defendant, though, was not in the lab. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Where was that?
It was during his first rotation talk. I went to go see another student who had just rotated through our lab, and I saw James give his first rotation talk.
Give us a characterization of the defendant's performance in the lab.
In the lab?
I'm sorry. Sorry. Honestly, it was the Kleenex that threw me.
I'm
started
sorry.
thinking about the Kleenex. I'm sorry. The defendant's performance in that presentation that you saw after the first rotation.
He looked incredibly uncomfortable. He looked unbelievably nervous. It was kind of a painful presentation to watch, just because I could tell that he was so uncomfortable giving that talk.
Did you interact with him at all between that time and when he ends up joining a class that you're also joining?
No, I wouldn't say.
Tell us about the class that you shared with the defendant, as well as what time frame that was.
The class was called Systems Neuroscience or Neurobiology, and it was a class that kind of studied the olfactory system and sensory, different topics in neuroscience. I was a fourth year at that point, and it was a first year neuroscience class, but I just kind of took it as an elective because I thought it was interesting, and because I was studying Parkinson's, I wanted a little bit more neuroscience background. And it was, I think it started right around Christmas time and ended maybe March, and it was 3 days a week, 2 hours a class.
Now, we've heard from Professors Klug and Tolene. Were they the ones that also participated in teaching that course?
Yes.
Okay. What time did the defendant, in terms of the calendar in 2012, what time did he join the lab with you?
It was the third rotation, so that went through the end of the year. It probably started at the end of January, maybe.
So was there some overlap between the lab and the classes that you shared with the defendant?
Yes.
All right. Now, before we talk about the lab, I want to talk to you about the class that you took with him. How many people were in that class?
It was all the first year neuroscience students and me, and I think maybe one other student, so maybe 10 about.
Is that a relatively small class?
Yeah.
Did you see the defendant in class every time that you were there? Do you ever remember him having any attendance issues? Or
No, he was there.
Describe for us, if you would, how did he present in class?
He really didn't seem very engaged in class at all. He actually didn't seem to be paying attention much. He kind of would like stare through the desk almost, I noticed. And there would be it was kind of a discussion-based class, so people would be asking questions and bringing up points, and he never volunteered anything.
Now, was there something else that took place, though, that led you to conclude, oh my gosh, he is paying attention?
Yeah, so he would just kind of stare through the desk, not be engaged at all, but then whenever a professor would ask him a question about the paper we were discussing or the topic we were discussing, he would kind of like almost snap back into it and answer the question correctly. So it was like he was paying attention even though it just didn't look like it at all.
Did you ever see him taking notes?
I don't remember him ever taking notes. I was constantly scribbling, but he kind of just...
You remember if he even had the book out and open?
I don't recall him ever having anything really even in front of him.
You ever recall him, despite that, ever answering a question incorrectly or demurring from the answer and saying, no, thank you, I'm not going to participate?
He would answer the questions, and I remember them always being correctly, but very short answers. As few words as he could to get the correct answer and then stop.
Did he strike you as someone who was smart?
Yes.
Now, at some point during that class, there's this overlap now where he joins Dr. Freed's lab. Tell me, did you ever try to engage the defendant after he joined the lab on more than just, hey, you're the guy across the room in class kind of a thing?
I remember, so we would have these kind of pop quizzes in that class, and I had never taken a neuroscience class, so I didn't do very good on that. And I remember at least once we would be like in the elevator together, and I would say, man, I really did poorly on that pop quiz, you know, trying to engage a conversation, and he would just respond like, oh, I did all right. And then that would kind of be the end of it. And so after a while, I just stopped any sort of communication.
We'll get back to that in a moment. Did you ever get a chance to see how the defendant was doing on those quizzes?
I don't recall. Maybe I assumed he did well, or but I know he was doing well in the class, or maybe I assumed he was just because he was always answering the questions correctly.
Okay. You talked about him not really re-engaging you in those conversations on the elevator. Describe what else the defendant did to lead you to conclude he just wasn't interested in kind of having conversations.
Well, yeah, so the class started at 3 p.m. and we were in the lab together. So, you know, he would make sure to leave the lab a little bit early to go to that class, and I assumed it was so that we wouldn't, you know, walk together, go down the elevator, go up the next elevator. He would make a point to be out of the lab before I was leaving. And I've noticed on at least one occasion, he would see that I was going to the elevator too, and he would kind of speed up to get into the elevator before me so that we wouldn't, I don't know, just because we weren't very chatty.
Now, during the time that you were in the lab, talk with us about what interactions you had with the defendant in the lab. I mean, did you work with him? Were you sort of supervising him? How did that work?
Not really. He and I worked on different projects in the lab, so he was really more working with a postdoc in the lab than me directly, but we had weekly lab meetings, and it was a small lab. It was just Kurt and me and Wimbo, who was an assistant professor, and then this postdoc. So it was a very small lab, and then the rotation students. And there was only one when James was in, and it was him. So we had these weekly lab meetings with 4 people in them, and they're supposed to be discussion based. But just like in class, he never really spoke unless he was asked a question.
If he was asked a question, how did he perform?
He answered the question correctly. And he would use as few words as possible to kind of get the spotlight off of him and have the discussion move forward.
Now, would you see the defendant on a daily basis in the lab?
Yes.
And did you, by the way, any concerns ever about him showing up on time or being there for the full amount of time, anything like that?
So usually first-year students are in the lab constantly because they're kind of trying to impress the professor, but he would leave early, and he just didn't seem very engaged or motivated in the lab.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. There are 2 things I want to talk to you about. Something called bench work and then stuff that would take place at the computer. First, describe for us what's bench work.
Well, you're literally standing at the bench. You usually have a pipette and you're doing experiments. He worked with stem cells, so we have a cell culture room, which is a hood so that the stem cells don't get contaminated. And so he would be doing many of his experiments within the hood, if he was doing experiments. But it seemed to me like he was mostly at his desk when he was in our lab. So he didn't look like he was doing many experiments.
Describe for us what you would see him doing, if you remember, at his desk.
He kind of leaned back in his chair. He always had headphones on. It didn't really look like he was doing much scientific research. I don't know what he was doing.
Could you see what was on his laptop at all?
No, I never went over there.
Did you ever get a sense from either observing him or talking with him about how his project with Dr. Fried was going?
I didn't really talk to him about his project.
What other observations did you make about him in the lab?
I noticed, and I distinctly remember this, there was more than one occasion where he would be in the lab, and he never made eye contact with me, but if I got to see his eyes, there was more than one occasions where his pupils were just completely blown out. And that, I know it was at least twice, probably more like 3 or 4 times when I'd pass him in the hallway, and I'd notice that, because it's just shocking. It's stunning.
Did you see any difference in his behavior, demeanor, affect, or presentation when you'd make those observations? Or was he the same?
No,
old
he
guy?
didn't. I mean, besides the pupils, it was the same kind of just awkward and quiet personality.
Now, did you have the opportunity to observe his final lab rotation presentation on May 17, 2012?
Yes, I did go.
Describe that for us.
Again, it just looked like he was so awkward and uncomfortable up there. He kind of gave off an annoyed vibe, but maybe annoyed isn't right. More like, it just seemed like he just didn't want to be up there at all. And it was very awkward. The content was good. He didn't have much data to present, but because he hadn't really worked very much in the lab, but it was a good presentation, I guess.
If you had to describe his motivation in terms of the lab performance, how would you describe that?
Unmotivated.
Go
I
ahead.
kind of thought, since it was the third rotation, the whole time I kind of assumed that he had already chosen a lab from one of his first 2 rotations, and he was just kind of going through the motions with this third one.
Why would you say that? What made you think that?
Just, he never, in lab meetings when we were all presenting his data, he'd either be like, well, I tried this and it didn't work. He never tried to adapt his experiments so that they would work. It just seemed like he was going through the motions in our lab.
How about initiative? How would you describe his self-initiative? Bless you.
Lacking.
Would he be able to do the things that he was told to do by Dr. Fried?
Yeah. So I remember one time specifically Dr. Fried asked him to he was studying microRNAs, and Dr. Fried asked him to make a presentation about microRNAs, like maybe 10 or 15 slides, to give us a background of what microRNAs are and how they work. And he did that presentation. It was good, but it was exactly 10 slides. It was just exactly what he was told to do. It was a good presentation, and that was it.
A couple final questions for you. One, during the time that you observed or were with the defendant, did you ever believe him to be detached from reality?
No.
Did you ever, over the course of the time that and I won't even count that first rotation presentation because you really hadn't met him, from the time that you were in class with him until May 17th, and I should have asked you this, did you ever see the defendant after May 17th?
No.
Okay. So from the time that you started that class with him that you described in, I think, December, all the way until May 17th, did he seem like the same guy start to stop over that period of time?
Yes, I would say so.
Have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Ms. Brady.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm going to show you a chart which has some classes on it, and I'm just going to have you identify where Professor Freed's is. If I can have Defense Exhibit 8, please. So if you look at that third white box at the top, does that appear to represent where Professor Freed's lab would have been in Mr. Holmes's lab rotation?
Yeah, that's correct.
And it has your name on there because you were in that lab at the time he was in there, right?
Correct.
And it says it went from approximately February to May. Does that look about right?
Yes.
Okay. And now you had testified that you also saw the lab presentation for the first lab. So would that have been Professor Klug's lab that he was presenting on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We can take that down. So some things that you noticed about Mr. Holmes was that he appeared to be quiet
Yes.
and socially awkward.
Yes.
What was the impression you got about his ability to socialize with other people?
Well, he certainly didn't really socialize with other people. I don't know if that's because he didn't want to, or if I always assumed it was because he was just, had such social anxiety that it made him nervous or something. Because of the eye contact thing, he just literally never made eye contact with me, and I knew him for months. So.
And were you trying to engage him? Were you trying to reach out to him?
I would say a little bit. At first I was. I wasn't going completely out of my way to be friends with him, of course, but I would make little small chat, when we were sitting waiting for class or something for a while, and then I just kind of stopped.
And it was your impression that when you were trying to make this small talk that he just could not do that with you?
Or didn't want to.
Okay. But either way, he didn't.
He didn't.
All right. And when you did notice his eyes, you noticed that his pupils were just, as you said, blown out, just very big?
That's correct.
When you watched him do that first lab rotation, what made it so awkward? Can you explain to the jury?
The presentation?
Correct.
Well, he kind of changed his voice during the presentation. It kind of came off as sarcastic. And I think that's just because he was so nervous. And he would look at the presentation the whole time and not at the audience at all. That kind of makes it hard for you to hear if you're in the audience. And he would have his pointer like right up here, and it just seemed like he wanted to get through it as quickly as possible. And then afterwards, people would ask questions, and he would either just say, I don't know, or he would give a very quick answer if he did know.
So no long explanations. It would just be quick answers, if any answer at all.
That's correct.
And all the while, you suspect that he's incredibly smart because he seems to know some of these answers in class.
Yes.
And he doesn't appear to be taking notes, but when called upon, can give the answer.
Yes.
Were you surprised that his presentations were so awkward and stilted?
No, I wasn't really surprised. He's not the only one that's awkward when giving talks, and especially the first-year grad students, it's incredibly nerve-wracking. So he wasn't alone in that, but he certainly was awkward.
Okay, and you said that it was painful to watch?
Yes.
Just because it did appear so awkward?
Yes.
You were also in a class with him. Again, if we can have Defense Exhibit 8, I'll have you point out which class it was that you were in with him. Would it be that Fundamentals of Neurobiology?
Yes, that's it. I thought it was called Systems Neuro, but it was the same class. That was the time period.
So December to March?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. And again, you said that he was completely silent unless spoken to.
Yes.
Not the kind to volunteer information, not the kind to raise his hand or initiate conversation.
Right.
You described what he would do in class as staring through the desk. Can you describe for the jury what you mean by that?
Well, he always had his eyebrows raised, it seemed like. And it just seemed like he was like daydreaming or zoned out, and it just like big eyes and just not focused on anything, just zoned out, it seemed like.
Right. And if called upon, you said he would sort of snap out of it.
Yeah, just kind of snap out of it, answer the question, and then 2 minutes later kind of be back in the same mode.
And when he would answer again, as few of words as possible.
That's right.
Did you ever see him make any strange facial expressions other than the sort of wide-eyed, raised eyebrow look?
Nope, just that. But I noticed it because I thought that was strange. Just constantly, that he always had that look. But not
And-
other than that.
Other than that, nothing else?
Right.
Any awkward positioning of his hands or body or anything like that? Any mannerisms that caught your attention?
Not really. No. Maybe just the way he gave the presentation, it just seemed so awkward. But not other than that.
Did he ever include any sort of awkward jokes in the presentation that made things uncomfortable?
I remember in the first one, there was like some silly joke that just nobody thought was funny. It was awkward. I keep saying that word, but it was like, but I don't think he had any jokes. I can't remember any in the presentation, the third one for Kurt's lab.
Did you ever see him dress strangely?
No.
Ever see his hair colored anything other than brown?
No.
Did he come to have the reputation of like that weird guy who had bad lab presentations?
Sustain as the foundation.
So does that mean I answer?
I'm going to ask you a couple more
Okay.
questions. Did he ever get a reputation concerning how he did during lab, a reputation with the other students around the neuroscience program?
I don't remember ever really talking to the other students about him. I may have, but they were all first year. They were much closer than I was kind of an outsider in that group.
So
Because I was a fourth year. So not that I know of.
And you testified on direct that he never changed. Was he constantly awkward from the first time you saw him until the last time you saw him?
Yes.
And constantly sort of had trouble socializing or interacting with people?
Yes.
If I can have just a moment.
Yes.
The sort of wide-eyed, zoned-out look that he would have during class, did you ever see him have that same look in the lab?
During lab meetings, it was the same way. Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any redirect, Mr. Bruckler?
Briefly, Your Honor.
All right.
You said during lab meetings. How about otherwise in the lab when he was doing stuff? Did you ever see him that way?
You know, when he was in the lab and when I was in the lab, I really only saw him like looking at his computer screen with his headphones on. So, no.
Okay. Ms. Brady asked you about his struggles with the presentation the first time that you described him as being awkward after that first rotation. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you said, hey, look, other first-year students are also awkward up there. Did you see that during the same period of time that you saw the defendant also awkward up there?
So other students that same day being awkward? Yeah, everyone gets nervous. There was another student that was actually in my program that gave a talk that day, and I remember him maybe even being more awkward up there. It's scary. So he certainly wasn't alone in that.
I don't have anything further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any recross? No, thank you. The jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness, so may this witness be released from our subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Any objection? No, sir. All right, thank you, ma'am. Do you have a short witness? I mean, not by stature, but brief.
20 minutes, Your Honor?
Can the jury stay till about 10 after 5? Can anybody not stay till 10 after 5? All right, nobody's raising their hand. Okay, you may proceed. Call your next witness, please.
People called Carrie Rotman.
Good afternoon. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer a note? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir. Please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names and your middle name if you have one.
Carey Ian Rotman, Carey-Ian-Rottman.
Ms. Tish-McGuire, you may proceed.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Were you at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado on July 19th, 2012?
Yes.
Did that go into the early morning hour of July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
What do you remember about the day of July 19th prior to going to the movie theater that day?
Pretty typical day, actually. My friend Pierce and I, who decided to go together, we had this planned earlier in the week. You know, things come up as they always do, and we actually decided not to go until Pierce called me later that day. Said, listen, this, and this kind of freed up. What do you think? Do you want to go? So me not having much to do that night, I said, yeah, absolutely. Let's buy some tickets and go.
Now, what's the full name of your friend Pierce?
Pierce O'Farrell.
How do you know him?
We met, I've been in Colorado about 7 or so years now. We met through a coworker of mine, actually, just became buddies right away. He actually, about a month before the shooting, married my wife and I, so you can tell we're very close-knit.
When did you buy your tickets for the movie?
We bought our tickets that day, that night. I can't remember exact time, late afternoon, early evening, off of just the website Fandango.
Do you recall what time you got to the movie theater that night?
I believe I would say in that 11:45, 11:50-ish range.
What'd you do when you got to the movie theater?
Typical, got to the movie theater, you know, handed our tickets in, got a couple snacks, and then just kind of, you know, we're getting close to the movie time, so went straight into the theater.
How'd you go about choosing your seats?
You know, like you could imagine on a, you know, a midnight premiere, it was pretty packed in there. So Pierce was just kind of leading the way, saw 2 seats right next to each other, and no brainer, just kind of went up there.
Do you recall where you sat in the theater that night?
Yes, if you're looking up towards the back of the theater, up the stadium seating, we were about halfway up, and we were the first 2 seats with me being closest to the aisle.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1162.
Yes.
Mr. Rotman, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And did you draw where you were seated in the theater on July 19th of 2012 and July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Does that fairly and accurately represent your memory as to where you were in the theater that night?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1162.
Any objection, Ms. Spangler?
No objection.
Without objection, it is admitted and it may be published.
Right, if I could please have 1162. All right, now, Mr. Rotman, there is a cordless microphone somewhere up there near you. And there is a large stick right up there. If you could please point out to the jury where you and Mr. O'Farrell were seated that night.
Yes, we were right in this area where you see C and P for Carrie and Pierce.
All right, so were you on the very aisle seat?
Yes, the very aisle seat.
And Mr. O'Farrell was just one seat over?
Correct.
And could you tell the jury where you entered the theater that night?
Yeah, we entered the theater at this entrance on this side.
Now that is actually like an exit that goes behind the theater. Is that where you guys entered the theater that
We
night?
didn't enter from behind, typically, you come in the front of the theater, the top of the theater, walk down, come into the theater and find your seat.
All right, and did you mark on there that we entered here, up there?
Yeah, entered up here.
And that's where you guys went into the theater?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. You can take your seat. Now, what did you and Mr. O'Farrell do while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
Just typical stuff, sat there and, chatted, small talk. My brother actually in Chicago was at the same movie at that time in Chicago, and he was just texting me, really cool movie, stuff like that.
At some point in time, did your movie begin that evening?
Yes.
Did something happen in your movie that night?
Yes, start off typically, previews, all that, typical beginning of movies. And then about, it's hard to say, but from the movie actually starting after the previews, I'd say between 5 and 10 minutes, just saw something launched in our direction, in our vicinity.
Now, did you see that midair, or did you notice when that started?
Yeah, I saw it mid-air, just looking up at, a big bright screen, just saw an object, kind of float across the screen, in an arc trajectory.
Now, if you were looking at the movie theater screen, what direction did that object go?
If I'm looking at the movie theater screen, front right, it came from.
And what direction did it go towards?
It went towards, kind of across my body to my left, to about the middle of the stadium seating, I would say.
What do you recall happening in the theater that night after you saw that canister?
Well, that canister hit the ground, and, you can hear the kind of heavy metal clank of it. Heard some hissing after that, and then, very close to kind of that hissing sound coming out, definitely there was fire was open there.
And what do you mean by fire was open in there?
Gunshot started firing from the front right of the theater. Pierce got down right away. For me, I've never been around guns or anything like that. I don't come from a hunting family or anything, so I just thought, what guy is lighting off firecrackers? What's going on in here?
Now, were you able to actually see a figure of anyone, or could you just see flashes of gunfire?
I could see flashes of gunfire, but through that you could certainly see a silhouette behind the gun.
And how would you describe that?
Just tall, dark. What I thought at the time definitely was, is that a gas mask or something over somebody's face?
And what area of the theater did you see that silhouette in?
That looked to be front right towards the exit.
What do you recall after Mr. O'Farrell's getting down on the ground? What do you recall you doing next?
After Pierce got down, that's when it kind of registered to me, get down, this is actually gunfire. From there, Pierce and I just kind of ducked for cover. I could hear very, very consistent, rapid gunfire at the time. I had half of my body, my lower half of the body, my legs were out in the aisle, with being that first seat in the aisle. Shortly after, the rapid gunfire, crying, just a very frantic, chaotic scene at that point.
And what do you mean by that?
Some people were getting up and trying to get out of there. Other people were ducked down at that point. Other people were hit and crying and screams. Things consistent with being in a situation like that, I would say.
Have you been in a situation like that before, Mr. Robin?
Not until that night.
Now, what do you recall after you are down on the ground with your legs in the aisle?
we're down on the ground at that point. I asked Pierce, what do we do? At that point, he just said, pray. I could hear Pierce praying. He was kind of holding on to part of my lower half. I was kind of hanging on to his legs. During that moment, the consistency of the gunfire certainly slowed down and stopped for a second. At that point, I was, pushing Pierce and whoever else was next to him. I was trying to push them in so I could get my legs covered. In the meantime, you could hear slightly more sporadic gunfire still going on, not as rapid as it was at the beginning. And during me kind of struggling to push these people in to kind of take more cover, that's when I got shot through my leg.
What did you feel when you got shot through your leg?
Just an absolute intense burning pain. The first thing that actually came to my mind, other than the pain, is just the immediate, rush of blood out of my leg. You could just feel the warmth, down that whole leg, down that whole side. Like I said, very intense burning, tore through the muscle.
What are you thinking during this time?
Honestly, there's not much going through through my mind. When I got hit, I almost immediately said, Pierce, I got shot. And all Pierce said, so did I. And that was pretty much the last interaction that us two had.
What do you recall after saying that to Pierce?
After saying that to Pierce, just whether it was the case or not, to me, I felt like the gunfire was sporadic enough and far enough away. So just instinctively, I just kind of, I got up. I took a couple grabs on the back of Pierce's shirt. At the time, he wasn't responding to me and not able to follow me at that time. I mean, the time period, it's hard to me. It feels like a very long time, but I'm sure it was just a couple seconds. Couple tugs, and that just turned and got out of there.
What did you think had happened to Mr. O'Farrell at that point?
I thought Pierce passed away at that point. He didn't respond back to me pulling on him at that moment, and just with the gravity of what was going on around us, that's what I thought.
What did you do after Mr. O'Farrell wasn't responding to you?
I just turned around. I was lucky enough I was able to kind of, I had my hand over the wound, just trying to put some pressure on it, and limped down and out of the theater.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask at this time for Mr. Robin to be able to approach the model.
Okay, take the microphone with you, please, the wireless, and make sure you keep your voice up.
All right, and I'm going to ask you to come stand over here for me towards the back of the diagram so that we don't block any of the jury's view.
Sure.
All right. So if you could first please show the jury where you and Mr. O'Farrell were seated that night.
I would say we were, right in this range here, about the middle of the way up the stadium seating, first two seats.
And you're the seat on the very end of the aisle?
Yes, I'm the seat closest to the aisle.
All right, so could you show for the jury where your legs were?
So my legs, say this is the spot, my legs were about like that, about halfway out.
And where was the location in the theater where you first saw the gunfire?
I saw that up front in this area, if that's the exit right there, not quite by the door, but more in this area, a little closer to the steps.
Now, where do you last recall seeing the figure of the shooter?
That was the last I recall, was up there, because during anything else that was happening, my upper half was behind the seats. I was crouched behind there.
And could you also please show for the jury where you saw that canister go across the theater?
Yeah, so I would say started, like I said, in this area here, had about this sort of trajectory, kind of looked like to be in the middle of the theater-ish area.
And could you describe for the jury your exit path?
Sure. When I got up, my thinking, I just got shot. The defendant, was possibly still on my side, so I thought the safest way was to go down and cut across here and go out the opposite exit.
And is that in fact what you did?
That's what I did.
All right, and then you went out to the main lobby area.
Correct.
All right, I have no further questions. Thank you. At the diagram. So what happened after you exited through the lobby, Mr. Rotman?
At that time, the lobby area was just very chaotic. Obviously people weren't quite aware of what was going on at that point. I wanted to be as far from that movie theater as possible, so I walked through the lobby, out the front doors. There's two big sets of front doors. I went out to the ones towards the left, and just kept going straight through the parking lot, trying to get some people to stop. I didn't know how bad I was injured at the time. I was wearing a big pair of black sweatpants that were, just soaked with blood, so I couldn't see anything through it. I didn't know what the extent of the injury was. I was just asking people, I've been shot in there, can somebody help me? And that's when a group of 3 or 4 people just came right up behind me, kind of scooped me up. A couple people with my upper body in their hand, a couple people with my lower body in their hand, and they brought me what looked like to be the farthest kind of grassy island of the theater parking lot and put me down there.
Now, to be clear, are these other moviegoers or are these ambulance technicians?
No, these were other moviegoers that did that. I mean, the one that I recall is Stephanie Rodriguez. She immediately when they put me down, she put her hands over my wound, and took off her belt and tied a tourniquet around my leg to slow the bleeding a little bit.
How long was it before any medical attention came your way?
It's really hard to, like I say, put a time on that. I mean, from the time I was sitting on the grass, 5-10 minutes maybe.
Did you have an opportunity to observe your injuries at that point in time?
Not at that point, I didn't. At that point, I was just more concerned with getting a hold of my wife and just letting her know what happened.
Were you eventually transported somehow to a medical facility?
I was.
How did that happen?
Laying on the grass there, a young man who I don't recall his name anymore, he saw a squad car pull in, and he took off, he ran, he grabbed those officers in that squad car and flagged them down and got them over to me.
What happened when they came over to you?
When they got over to me, it wasn't much questioning or anything like that. Obviously, they knew what happened. I'd been shot in the theater. And one of the officers kind of had me from behind and picked me up with me in front of him, kind of his chest to my back, and literally just kind of fell back into the car and into the back seat of the squad car and dragged me in on top of him.
So were you kind of laying on top of the police officer?
Yep, correct. I was laying on top of him.
Did you get transported to a medical center that entire way, laying on top of a police officer?
Yeah, and they put my leg out the window because the leg couldn't move at that point.
What else do you recall about that, Rob?
I mean, just the excruciating pain, not being able to get a hold of my wife. I was squeezing the officer's forearms just, for any sort of, to deflect the attention away from, the pain in my leg at that point.
How quickly did they get you to a medical facility?
They got me to the medical facility very quick. Like I said, anything during this whole thing, the time frame to me probably seems a little skewed because it's always going to seem longer when you're going through, something like that. But honestly, I would probably say less than 5 minutes. I was at the emergency room.
And what emergency room did you go to?
Medical Center of Aurora.
What happened when you got to the hospital?
When I got there, they pulled me out of the squad car and put me on a gurney, and immediately the doctors in the ER, it wasn't, they said gunshot wound to the leg, and they're like, well, this guy got shot in the chest. Apparently in my in my movement to crouch down and take cover, a bullet, what I'd think must have grazed my chest and went through. I had 3 shirts on at the time and went through everything straight down to my skin. So they saw that first and kind of pulled open from there to make sure I hadn't been shot in the chest.
When were you able to receive medical treatment that night?
It took a while. Luckily my injuries weren't life-threatening. And when that's the case, you get put to the back of the line for people who need the immediate attention.
Sustained.
What time, did you have to have any surgeries as a result of the shooting?
I did. I had 2 surgeries altogether.
All right, when was the first surgery?
The first surgery was the early morning after the shooting. I would say time-wise, I finally got in around 6:30.
All right, and how long were you in the hospital?
1 week.
All right, when was your second surgery?
My second surgery was the day before I left the hospital, so I believe on the 6th day.
Did you have to have follow-up medical treatment after you left the hospital after that week?
Yes, I did. A handful of doctor's appointments, orthopedic surgeon, plastic surgeon, physical therapy.
How long were you in physical therapy?
Sustained.
Do you have any permanent other damage as a result of the shooting?
Yeah.
Overruled.
You can answer the question.
Yes, I'm obviously one of the lucky ones, but I still have, I lost 30 to 50% of my quadriceps muscles in my leg. There's permanent nerve damage in the front. I've got no feeling pretty much from where I was shot below that to, mid-knee about, so.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibits 2016 and 2017?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Rotman, do you recognize the person in the photograph that's marked 2016?
Yes, I do.
Who is that person?
That's me.
Was that taken on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Does that fairly and accurately represent your condition on the night of July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
All right, and if you could turn to 2017, please. What is that a photograph of?
That's a photograph of my leg injury.
All right, does that fairly and accurately represent what your leg looked like on July 20th of 2012?
It does.
Your Honor, at this time I move for the admission of People's Exhibits 2016 and 2017.
Any objection?
No additional objection.
Without any additional objection, and based on my previous rulings, P-TR-2016 and P-TR-2017 are admitted and may be published.
Thank you. If I could please have 2016. All right, if you could describe.
This was just on the gurney on the side of, ER hallway, just kind of waiting for my turn for surgery.
If you could please describe for the jury what's depicted in this photograph.
That's a picture of my right leg where I was shot, luckily bandaged up, and that was after, cleaned off with saline solution and whatever else they did at the time.
Could you describe for the jury where the bullet went through your leg?
Yeah, it started on my upper outside of my right thigh and traveled through in a downward angled motion through my quadriceps muscles over the femur bone and out on the inside of my thigh above my knee.
Mr. Rotman, when you were able to limp out of the theater that night, do you recall if the shooter was still in the theater at that point in time?
At that point, I don't. I didn't look around one bit when I was on my way out.
Do you recall if you remember hearing any gunfire as you were leaving the theater that night?
As I was leaving, I don't think there was any more gunfire as I was leaving, but like I said, it was kind of tunnel vision at that point, and I was just trying to get out of there.
No further questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Rotman.
Is there any cross-examination, Ms. Spengler?
No, there's not, thank you.
And the jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness. May this witness be released from his subpoena?
Please, thank you very much, Your
Any
Honor.
objection? All right, thank you, sir. All right, members of the jury, it's 12 minutes after 5, so we are going to go ahead and adjourn for the day. Please remember all the advisements that I have been giving you throughout the trial. Each and every one of them is extremely important and applies, and each and every one of you must comply with those advisements, okay? Enjoy your evening, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at the usual time. Thank you. The record should reflect the jury has exited the courtroom. Now everyone may be seated. Mr. Orman, did you have a chance to figure out Exhibit P-TR-2504 or not yet?
Your Honor, I probably should have mentioned not including that one. I didn't mean to introduce it. What had happened was the photographer, when taking the pictures, had accidentally activated the shutter on the camera and taken a picture of his leg. And it's literally a picture of a pant leg down to the carpet. So I don't need that as part of the record. But if you want a copy of it so you can have that, because we've mentioned it, I can give you a copy.
That's the photographer's leg? No, I don't need a picture.
Yeah, it's the photographer's leg. Well, it appears to be a leg.
I don't need a picture of that, no.
Okay.
Unless you want it for the record, but I don't think we need it. Let me just correct my notes then and just make sure that they are accurate. Okay, I've added in as exceptions to the photographs that were admitted in the group of 2315 through 2509, I've added 2504 as being one of those that was not admitted. So the ones not admitted are 2504, 2355, 2356, and 2446, at least within that group, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else on behalf of the people at this time?
Apparently not. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, anything on behalf of the defense at this time? No? Okay. Thank you. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow morning. The court will be in recess.
All right.